One of the absolute biggest beginner mistakes that I see when people are photographing moving water is that they don't quite have control over the shutter speed. What I mean by that is they're not using the right shutter speed. There is definitely a correct and an incorrect shutter speed to use when photographing water if you want to create the most compelling images. Now, a lot of photographers will go out there when they're new, they'll grab the darkest 10-stop ND filter they can find, they'll go out there and they will photograph that water as long as they can, maybe a 30-second long exposure. Don't do that. It's going to look terrible. There's a much better exposure to use, a much better shutter speed, and I'm going to show you guys what that is. And in fact, almost 99% of the time, I'm not using an ND filter. All that I've got on is a circular polarizer. So I'm going to show you guys exactly what shutter speed I like to use, what shutter speeds I don't like to use, and talk a little bit about why. So let's jump right in there and go ahead and look at some of the images I've got. All right, guys, so I want to start off with a little comparison. This photo, I feel like the shutter speed is really good. Now, if you're just here to see what shutter speed I recommend and you are going to head out, the long story short is I recommend about a half a second, maybe a fourth of a second or a fifth of a second, something pretty short. But I want to talk you guys through why I recommend that. And then I want to talk about when to use a little bit faster of a shutter speed as well and some shutter speeds to avoid. So the first photo here you can see took a few weeks back in the Zion Narrows. I really like this shutter speed. You can see how the water is really textured coming through here. But I want to show you guys a different photo. And let's go back this way here. So I want to show you guys a different photo here. So we are going to go to this one. Now, this photo is taken with a 5-second shutter speed. Now, look at the difference. I will actually hover both of these and compare so that we can look at them side by side. Okay, so when we have these photos up next to each other, you can see the one on the left is our 5-second exposure, and this one on the right is our half-second exposure. Now, look how much more character this water has in it than this water. This water is super smooth. It's almost silky smooth, but what I like about this is that the water still has texture. This photo on the right kind of makes me feel like the water is moving and has texture, and on the left, because I'm a photographer, I know that of course the water is moving, and that's what moving water looks like in a photograph. But to someone that doesn't really know photography, they're going to look at this and kind of wonder why the water looks so soft and fuzzy, whereas over here you've got some motion. You can see there's some character right here where that water is hitting and kind of churning right there, as well as right here. And in this photo, it's just simply soft and fuzzy and not too good. So you can see why I would recommend that half-second shutter speed over a 5-second or longer shutter speed. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, a lot of photographers are even using up to 30-second shutter speeds, which you can imagine how incredibly smooth that would be. It's going to be way too smooth and not be interesting for the viewer. Now, oftentimes I will vary between a half a second and 1 second, maybe a little bit faster, but rarely do I go slower than 1 second. In this instance, there was not as much water moving, even though it looks like there's a lot. This is not a lot that's rolling over these rocks here, and it was kind of rolling slowly. So I ended up going with a 1 second shutter speed, and I want to show you guys a faster and a slower, and then talk about why I went with this shutter speed. Here is the slower image at 2 seconds, and I'm just going to keep toggling back and forth between these two images, 2 second, 1 second, 2 second, 1 second, and it's very, very subtle, but look at how much more character this second image has. And I'm looking down here, you can see that when we zoom in, a little bit less than that, you can kind of see the individual strands of water. And when I go back an image, you don't see those individual strands as much. And that's created essentially from the water drops like hitting a rock and then spraying up. So it gives it a little bit more character, a little bit more interest. So that's why I went with 1 second. Now I'll show you guys the shorter exposure, which was 1/8 of a second, which is not enough for this photo. It's, as you can tell, it's a little busy. It's not quite as easy to look at as this 1 second. The 1/8 of a second is really busy. There's a little too much going on for me. So finding the right shutter speed is all about finding balance in your image. You need to figure out where you can find that really nice and smooth texture here, but not too smooth. But not too fast either to have too much going on. You can see I especially don't like this spot right here. So it is a really fine balance. Now I want to talk about one more instance where I do really like that slow shutter speed. You can see in this image here, we use the slow shutter speed to accentuate this water that was rolling off of the rocks. Now it is a little bit busy up here. I'm not super crazy about that, but I really like how this turned out. And I probably took photos with 10 different shutter speeds, all just clicking that shutter speed once or twice and trying a new photo. This was the one I liked the most because of the way that it fans out the water on this rock. You have to keep in mind how much water is actually coming down when you decide your shutter speed. For this one, I went with 1/4 of a second. Like I mentioned before, usually I find between 1/4 of a second and 1 second is the sweet spot, with 1/2 a second being usually where I start and work from there. But you can just see how nicely this water rolls off this rock here. You can see the kind of individual strands of water. It's not too smooth. If I had taken a longer shutter speed, this would all be one color of water coming down. It'd be really smooth and not very exciting, but this gives it a little more depth and dimension here. All right, so we've talked about the slower shutter speeds. Like I said, I'll mention one more time. I do like between 1/4 and 1 second, no longer, no shorter. Now, there is times where fast shutter works for waterfalls. I want to jump in and show you guys a couple examples of when you might want to try for a faster shutter speed. This first example is of one of my favorite waterfalls in Oregon. You can see how I used a 1/400th shutter speed here. And that is generally on the kind of slower end of the fast shutters, meaning that I usually won't go slower than 1/400th until I get down to my 1/2 second mark that I usually go in. So I avoid those 1/20th, 1/30th, 1/40th, 1/50th, 1/80th, etc. I avoid all of those shutter speeds in waterfall photography and any kind of water photography because it's not a flattering shutter speed for the water. It just kind of makes it blurry but not smooth. So if you are going to go with a fast shutter speed, go at least 1/400th, if not faster. Now that's going to work great on images like this one, where there's just a ton of water gushing over this waterfall and creating a lot of mist. Now, when you slow down the shutter speed, it will smooth out all of this motion, but that really smooths out things down here, and it makes it so that we can't quite see this mist. The things that make this photo really nice are the mist kicking up down here on the bottom and the light shining through. And the light is shining through the mist, so we would not see that light there if we were to use a longer shutter speed, or at least we wouldn't see the light as well. It wouldn't look as realistic. So in this instance, I use a faster shutter speed. You're going to see, usually I use these fast shutter speeds in places where there is just a lot of water coming down. And of course, I always recommend to people, when you're out there shooting a waterfall or shooting a river or whatever, try multiple different shutter speeds. Try fast, try slow, see what you like better. Go home and decide on the computer. You don't need to decide in the field. Take some images of both. Now, this last image is of a waterfall in Yosemite. If you've been out there, you know this really beautiful waterfall. It is very small at the top, but the way that it puts off water is just beautiful. I got some awesome light on it, and I used a shutter speed of 1/1250th of a second, very, very fast. And that is because I wanted to capture the kind of oddness of the water coming down. You can see how it kind of comes down in little chunks, I guess, is the way I would describe it. And I wanted to capture that. With the slow shutter speed, this is a very boring shot. It's just a basic white streak coming down. So I was able to use a fast shutter speed to kind of make the shot a little bit more interesting than it would have been with a slow shutter speed. And again, just like in the last photo, it also helped me to capture the mist down here, which is creating a little bit of a waterfall with the sunlight hitting it. So for this photo, I really like the faster shutter speed. So no matter what kind of rivers or waterfalls you're shooting, you are going to want to stay in this range. Find the right shutter speed for you. And once you're out there shooting a lot of rivers or waterfalls or whatever it'll be, you are going to find the shutter speed that you really like. Like I said, I personally like about a 1/2 a second for slow shutter, and then about 1/500th or faster for that fast shutter speed. And you'll find what you like too when you've gone out enough. Of course, this is just my opinion. There's no right or wrong answer, but I do like my water to have a little bit more character and a little bit more going on to make my image a little bit more interesting. Hopefully that helps you guys decide on your shutter speed, gets you guys inspired to get out there, shoot some waterfalls this winter, find some good rivers to shoot, and use the right shutter speed and try this out. I mean, just go to your local stream or river if you have one and try out different shutter speeds, see what you think, bring them into Lightroom, whatever you edit your photos in, bring them in there and kind of check them out and see what they all look like. So thank you guys so much for checking out this week's video. Really appreciate you guys checking it out. As always, we will see you guys next weekend. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.